Hi guys, what's going on? And welcome back to another episode of Total War Arena. So today we are taking a look at the patch notes for the 3.1.11 patch. These are getting more and more complicated in numbering every time. Yes, so it's actually quite a significant patch, this one, compared to some of the previous ones, with quite a lot of balance changes and some new features coming along as well, so we've got quite a lot to get through. What to start with first? Well, probably the most important thing I think that's changing or being introduced, which I'm quite pleased about, is the report player button that's being brought into the game. Something that's been needed for quite a long time, I think, and certainly a good thing that's changing because, you know, so far there's been no real way of reporting players other than screenshotting, going through to support, and then doing it that way. Which, yeah, it works, but it's not a very easy way of doing it, and I think it's something that a lot of people can't be able to do. So I think actually introducing a report player function is a good thing, as long as it's sort of used properly and not abused too much by the player base. I think it's certainly a step in the right direction, and should hopefully perhaps get rid of, or at least deter perhaps a little bit of sort of some of the toxic behaviour that can sort of find its way in the game a little bit. So yes, we've got that coming in. That is certainly an improvement. What else have we got? We've also got scene selection coming in, which is something that's a little bit different. I had no idea this was coming, particularly. It's basically going to be, it's kind of like, if those of you who played World of Tanks, it's kind of like having your fancy garage when you have a premium account. But you're going to be able to basically change the background, so rather than being like at the port when you're with your units, you know, you could have them in the forest in your scene, or in town, or etc, etc. There's going to be a handful of scenes available for just a small little bit of gold. I've actually got a handful of images for these as well with the patch notes, which I'll probably put at the end of the video so you can have a look at them, or you can probably just head over to the patch notes, and I suspect that they will put them in there when they release them, so we've got either of them to look at. So yeah, they're kind of the two new things that are being introduced in the game, but there is an absolute ton of balance changes being brought in for commanders, basically, mostly, although a handful of units as well. So, quite a few significant ones. The first one that springs to mind, Vengeance, is getting a nerf. I didn't really expect this to happen. I didn't really think that they would bother nerfing Vengeance. Not to say that it doesn't need a little bit toning down, but I thought they were going to leave it as it is. But in essence, they are reducing the total amount of melee attack and melee damage that it can build up to. I think it was 105% or maybe 120% it could go up to before, and now it's sort of being knocked down from 105 to 80. Yeah, so it's just getting reduced a little bit at each tier, and I think that's going to be spread across the whole thing. So it's not going to be quite as potent as it once was, but I mean 80% melee attack and 80% melee weapon damage is still a really potent force. So yeah, still don't underestimate Vengeance. It's just going to be a little bit less extreme than it once was. What else has been changed? Leonidas is getting a small buff by the looks of it. In terms of fighting the Shade is no longer going to have the melee defense penalty. And what's the tier 10 melee defense talent is going to be increased slightly. Okay, it's good. It's basically getting a little bit of buff more in the later game. They say as sort of a comment next to it that they felt Leonidas was really quite strong in the early game, but was tapering off a little bit in some of the later tier gameplay. And they felt that they wanted to sort of buff him slightly, so that's obviously something they've done. Now this is one I am really pleased about. Vercingetorix is getting a buff, which is really nice. It seems they are trying to buff him in an infantry sense rather than a cavalry sense, so it looks like they're putting a lot of effort into Iron Discipline. It is getting a plus 10 base missile block chance, which is a really nice little thing, particularly something that the barbarians struggle a lot with when it's missile block. Particularly sometimes when they're in hand-to-hand combat, you know, enemy archers will shoot into combat with, you know, if you're engaged with Romans or something, because they know that their Romans won't take many casualties, whereas the barbarians with their much lower missile block chance will, in essence, take a lot of casualties. So that's certainly an interesting thing that's changing. It's also getting increased melee defense with Iron Discipline. And yeah, that's certainly a step, I think, in the right direction, and the duration of Defiance and stuff is getting a little bit longer as well. But I think they were trying to stop Defiance being buffed too much because they are worried about the effect that's going to have on Vercingetorix Cavalry, because they felt that Vercingetorix Cavalry was too strong, which is what was behind some of the Vercingetorix nerfs probably about 3 or 4 patches ago now. So yeah, I think that's probably a good thing. Quite a clever way of doing it, to moving it more onto Iron Discipline rather than on Defiance. So it's a good little way of sort of changing that. God, there's a lot of changes. Caesar, in essence, is getting a small nerf. They still feel he's a really potent commander, which I think he is. I think the problem with Caesar is he's a really good team commander. That's where he comes in a lot with some of the higher tier game players, with parties and stuff, where they can utilise a Caesar and buff a lot of their allies, particularly with the area of the effect buffs. So he's getting a handful of changes, particularly to things like Vici and Veni. I think Veni's the silencing one. Or was it Vici? No, I think it's probably Vici was the silencing one, which is now going to be sort of nerfed and not quite such a long uptime, and it's all sort of been toned down a little bit. Scipio is getting a strong buff, well, strongish buff. In essence, Scipio's problem was Oath of Perseverance was a pretty redundant ability, because as soon as you activate it, it gets a huge movement speed penalty, which in essence means that it can never keep track of anyone. You know, if you engaged enemy infantry or enemy archers or something like that into Oath of Perseverance, it's very easy for those units just to run away, because you go so slow that they can easily get away until your Oath of Perseverance goes off, and then they can just re-engage you, or etc, etc. It turns out to be more of a disadvantage a lot of the time than it is an advantage. So they've basically changed it so it no longer carries such a movement speed debuff. It's gone from 80% to 40%, which is quite nice. And Warcry is also getting a slight change to its charge deflect up at tier 10, so it's now a movement speed modifier as well. So you're now only down to 40% movement speed penalty, and then you can minus 10% off the enemy movement speed as well. So it's not going to be quite as critical as it was. It should be allowed to at least sort of pin down enemy infantry a little bit more, if probably not enemy cavalry, because the Romans are already slow on that front. There's more coming. This one's kind of a sad one for me, really, because I'm a huge fan of Sulla, and Sulla is kind of being nerfed, not heavily, but he's certainly getting a decent nerf, in the sense that his melee attack is being reduced from whip from 80 down to 68%. That's fully upgraded. And it's not getting quite such a speed bonus either. At the moment, if you whip, it gives you a 30% speed bonus once you're at tier 7, something like that. And that's going down to 23%. And Prescription is being nerfed from a 60% melee attack reduction down to a 52%. So it's just basically a toning down of all of his skills. So he's not going to be quite as strong as he was. There we go, there's a Sulla there. You know, it's not going to be 30% movement speed, but 23. And not 80% melee attack, but what was it? 68. So it's not a massive nerf, but kind of a shame. I'm a big fan of Sulla. I think he works really well in the right situation. So I'm a little bit sad that it's going to be nerfed, but maybe not entirely unjustified. Then there's a handful of other ones. I don't know, I can go on all day. Kanane's Barrage is getting a nerf still. I think in essence they're taking away, whereas once it gets fully upgraded, you can almost completely negate the armor penetration problem that it has. You know, it goes from minus 50 armor penetration to 0 once you get to the higher tiers, and they're basically making it so it goes down to just minus 20. So there's still going to be some negative armor penetration modifier, so going to reduce the damage of Kanane a little bit, which kind of makes sense. And I think Rapid Advance is getting a little bit of a nerf as well. I think it's because they acknowledge the problem that pikes have. Is this going to be a Kanane pike? No, it's not. Pikes have a problem where Rapid Advance could be activated with Kanane, and they could basically swivel on the spot like pirouette dancers, and it was a bit silly because it means you could rear flank a pike unit, but so long as they were in phalanx, they could just spin around, activate Rapid Advance, spin around, and then they're facing you, and then you just get slaughtered. And that's something they're really trying hard to nerf in this upcoming patch. And that kind of leads me on quite well to some of the movement and turn speed changes that are also being brought into the game. So yeah, they're specifically trying to penalise or reduce the amount of turn speed that pikes have, because they feel that you know, they don't want people to be able to do that, to be able to turn around, because pikes are obviously very powerful from the front. If you get pinned against pikes, you just get absolutely destroyed. So they've also introduced a base turn speed decrease of about 18%. So yeah, pikes really suffering quite a lot in this patch, but I think that's kind of understandable. It is quite frustrating that, you know, you can rear flank so many pikes, and yet they can just sort of turn around and then slaughter you. Makes it pretty hard to deal with them. So yeah, that's something that's getting nerfed. But on the sort of subject of turn speed, a lot of units have had their turn speed buffed quite heavily. I'm going to see the list here. You'll be able to see the full list on the patch notes. but a lot of premium units, as long as some of the Carthaginian infantry, some of the Roman infantry as well, along with a handful of cavalry and etc. etc. are having their turn speed increased by roughly 50%. I even see the Auxiliary Palatina in there, which is the T8 premium unit that hopefully the review was out on Monday. So even they're benefiting from the turn speed buff as well. So yeah, it's yes, quite the increase in turn speed for a lot of units, while quite a nerf for pike units. It'll be kind of interesting to see how that sort of balances out. And then there's just a handful of sort of higher tier nerfs, basically. A lot of the archers having their power reduced slightly. They were getting pretty ridiculous up at tier 10. Particularly some of the barbarians like the archers of Ulla. It's got such a weapon damage buff that even it was just overmatching everyone's body armor, doing obscene amounts of damage. So that has really been brought down a little bit. A lot of the bows had their damage reduced. And I think some of the consumables got a little bit nerfed as well in that. So yeah, an overall damage reduction in terms of most of the top tier archers. That's also true for the Crucian archers as well, the Greeks. And it looks like a couple of cavalry got a sort of missile block chance nerf. I'm not entirely sure of the purpose of that. I guess that they felt that it was getting a little bit powerful, but it seems to me to suggest some of the Legatus, the Noble Horse, and the Numidian Vanguard all getting missile block chance nerfs. Perhaps a little surprised about. I didn't necessarily think that was necessary, but I've not played that much tier 10 cavalry, so maybe I can't comment too much. Yeah, and that pretty much sums up the bulk of the changes. There's a few ground effect changes for cavalry as well in terms of their speeds in forests, but they're still fairly big penalties. I don't think it's going to make any big difference. Don't take the cavalry in forests, basically. And a couple of bug fixes as well, of which are all largely pretty irrelevant. So hopefully that was quite an extensive summary. It certainly ran on a bit longer than I had intended. I've not had such a big patch notes to get through for quite a while. Some of the last two patches have actually been quite small. So it's nice to see lots of changes being brought in, particularly many of the balance changes that I think we've all been seeing on Reddits and Discords and complaints about for quite a long time. It seems they've actioned quite a few of them in this patch. So let me know what you think, particularly about the balance changes. I'm really interested in that, and also about the report button as well in the comments down below. And yeah, subscribe to the channel for lots more Total War Arena content, and I shall see you all on the next video.